Andrew Leland on his instant classic, The Country of the Blind. Speaker, Andrew Leland. Moderator, Daryl Adams, Director of Accessibility, Intel.
Thank you, Alice and John. And it is my pleasure to be able to sit down today and have a candid conversation about sight loss with Andrew Leland. Andrew is the author of The Country of the Blind, a memoir at the end of sight. And beyond being an author, Andrew is also a journalist, producer, longtime podcast host, and overall arts and culture kind of guy. So Andrew, welcome to Sight Tech Global.
Oh man, thanks so much for having me. I'm psyched to be here.
Awesome. You know, you and I share a diagnosis and really a lived experience with retinitis pigmentosa or RP. And, this is a retinal disease where we're gradually losing our eyesight from the outside in. Mm-hmm. And reading your memoir just really struck a chord with me in terms of just, it felt like my own story in so many ways. So I'm just curious, what prompted you to want to share this personal journey with the rest of the world through your memoir?
There's a bunch of things that made me want to share it. I think the main impetus was the ambiguity of being low vision. And I had this experience when I started using a cane full time, maybe coming up on 8 years ago now or so, where, I still was able to see like the don't walk sign, or I could like look at my phone with the text magnified, or, there's all kinds of things I could see. But I had my cane and people see the cane and they just think, oh, okay, there's like a totally blind guy. And just constantly all day long, I was experiencing this kind of ricocheting between like feeling, as I write in the book, like too blind to be sighted, too sighted to be blind. And that, I think, made me really want to try to communicate this experience to the world, but also to myself in some ways. Because I think the more I thought about it, the more I realized like I hadn't quite wrapped my head around what that means. Like, what does it even mean to be low vision? Like, am I blind? When does that kind of category include me? So it was as much a way to explain it to myself as to the world. But I think that ambiguity is something that really inspires a desire to push back against those binaries and say like, hey, actually, there is a lot of fluidity in this experience world. Why don't you follow me down this path?
Yeah, that's like, it's such an interesting thing because I've been telling people after reading the book that you've given me a new vocabulary. And one of those examples was that too sighted to be blind, too blind to be sighted type of mantra. Because when I try to explain to people what I see and what I don't, it's like, it's just difficult to put into words because it is so context dependent.
Yes.
So it's continuously evolving over time. I kind of felt like, I do feel like I am never an expert in my own condition, in the sense that as soon as I learn something new and there's ways to get around things that I was previously unable to do, along comes another challenge that I have to go figure out. And that's where I think what I really appreciated about the way that you've put the story on paper is that you really kind of differentiated this notion of being losing sight as a physical component versus the emotional and psychological aspects, and working through those independently. What do you think in terms of starting with the physical pieces?
Yeah,
where did you first start seeing the need for change?
Change in my own behavior, you mean?
Yeah.
It's such an interesting question, and I think you're absolutely right that I think the way that we tend to think about medical, issues in general, whether it's a disease, an illness, an injury, diagnosis, it's this very external thing, right? Like the doctor tells you, the doctor has like some measurement tools, and then it kind of is imposed on you, like, okay, you have this many months to live, or you will never use your right arm again. There's this medical authority that I think as a culture, at least in the US, certainly we just put so much stock in it. And one thing that this experience of gradual vision loss from RP has showed me is just how subjective it is. And then I have to be careful about that because there still is a sort of undeniable scientific, like my retinal cells are legit dying, right? And like there is a scientific measurement you can make of that. But even that scientific measurement is largely based on my own subjective response to like an eye chart or to a Goldman periphery test. And so that's like the beginning of my understanding of the sort of fluidity again, and the sort of spectrum and the murkiness of what I originally conceived of as like a very kind of binary scientific process. But then even beyond that murkiness of like of sort of the difficulty of measuring it, the thing that I've realized when I started researching rehabilitation, which is sort of like the industry term for it, but like, cane training or learning assistive technology, Braille, the question of like, when do you start to use a screen reader, for example, or when do you start to use a white cane? Like it's not like, there's no, like, I really wanted like, the president of blindness.com to call me up and be like, Andrew, congratulations. Like it is now time for you to use a white cane between the hours of 8 and 11, but really you have to make the call yourself. And just, having talked to so many folks with RP and just blind people in general, it's a very common story of like, okay, like third close call with whatever it was, whether it's driving or, an injury or something, like, I guess I need to use the cane or use a screen reader. And that's just again, it's back to that idea of ambiguity. It's like, you really have to intentionally and internally make that decision, and no doctor or trainer or anybody else can really do it for you.
Yeah, when you you mention and you describe your doctor's visits, and I had the sensation that you were like in the same office that I was, although we were not. It was incredible how similar the discussion was, and the expectations that were set, and how that changes over time. And I just like, and I know that there's so many people going through that same set of diagnosis, emotional evolution, go down this path, and it's really heartening to be able to see this like in print, to understand that you're not alone in the And I was also thinking about, you mentioned the white cane as a good example of the tools of the trade, essentially, as you move closer toward blindness and needing to understand, obviously needing to be, needing to learn orientation mobility skills in order to be independent. And I thought it was just really, again, like almost, it feels like probably near universal scenario where you have to start using a cane or doing something different in order to remain independent, but there's a resistance to the cane. And
yeah,
I would just wonder, you mentioned carrying the cane around for a long time, all folded up and just kind of hiding it, but just in case. And I was so much in that same boat, and I'm so thankful to be beyond that now. And I'm just curious, like, do you have, based on your experience and based on all of the people that you've talked to in your travels, any advice for people that are starting this journey and are carrying that cane, or maybe not even yet to that point, like how to get past that a bit and just more comfortable with the blindness as an identity? Yeah,
that's such a tough one. And this is advice that I've gotten myself. And I've gotten it in various guises with varying degrees of bedside manner. One person said to me, I said to somebody, I won't name them, but they, I was kind of asking them this question about screen readers. And I was like, look, like I can see my screen with magnification A-okay. Like this was maybe 5 or 6 years ago. And I can see my phone. Like, is it really worth it to start learning voiceover and JAWS or whatever now? And they said to me like, well, I don't know. Like when you lose the ability to see your screen comfortably, like, do you think you're going to have an emotional reaction to that? And this is a blind person. I was really taken aback. And I was like, yeah, I think so. And they're like, well, then you're probably not going to like be in the mood to like be memorizing keyboard shortcuts at that juncture, right? Like better to do it now. And at the moment it rubbed me the wrong way. It was kind of this like tough love moment, but in retrospect, I think that's incredibly good advice. Because it's true. Like when you inevitably have this sort of grieving moment or grieving process that I think I think to grow up with sight and then to lose it, like even if you're just like a total, guru, yogi, like enlightened, just like figured it out, harnessed the power of it, like you have to grieve that loss to some degree, I think. And everybody does it to a different degree or a different style. But like in that grieving process, that's not when you want to be like figuring out how screen readers work, right? Or like how cane travel, like the fundamentals of it. There's inevitably going to be a lot of adaptation that's going to have to happen. And so I really took that to heart, but it's still like that's easier said than done, because the question is like, well, how much in advance do you do it? And like if I had done that like 10 years ago, I think it would have felt really silly in some ways, like just like practicing voiceover for 10 years before I even like needed it at all. So I think it requires like a little bit of projection, but it's hard to know how much projection, because like my eye doctor, I think like most eye doctors tend to be pretty wary of giving any like concrete, like, well, I think probably like we're looking at 2027, you're going to not, and they don't really know either. So yes. Yeah. So the advice I would give is like, try to stay ahead of the curve always. Don't be like bonkersly ahead of the curve where you're just like, if you're still driving, you don't necessarily need to like learn how to use a cane. But like, I like to compare it to having a kid, actually, because I remember when my wife Lily was first pregnant, it was kind of like, oh my God, like how are we going to deal with this? And then I was like, well, we have 9 months to figure that out, right? And then it was like Oscar was born, and it was like, oh my God, how are we going to do this? And it's like, well, he like can't really go anywhere, so we have like time to like buy those little plastic thingies to put in the plugs, And there was, I think with RP, there is like that kind of like natal sense of a built-in track to kind of prepare ahead of the game. And you don't really know what to expect, but you can also sort of be savvy about it. And of course, this is like a very particular version of the blindness experience. There are people who go blind overnight and they don't have that luxury. But I think for guys like you and me who have this like, 4% of your visual field a year, like drip, 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 like I think that's the way to approach it.
Awesome. That's fantastic. And I think, you speak about Lily and Oscar, and it makes me wonder more also about you mentioned a bunch about how your relationships evolve, and just thinking about being basically introspecting on who you are as a person, who you are as a boyfriend, then husband, then father, and how losing sight does and does not impact that your roles in the family. And curious of what kind of today, after what you've been through now with the book and everything post book, what are your thoughts on that? Like, how do you see your journey into blindness impacting positively and negatively your relationships?
That's a tough one. I mean, I think those relationships in particular, it's been really positive. I mean, I think Lily and I have certainly had to go through, and we continue to go through, adjustments. We were just on a trip we went to Berlin for a week over Thanksgiving, and at night I would kind of follow them, and sometimes they would just like cross the street and I wouldn't know that they had crossed the street, and I would be stuck there, but I would sort of be and then by the time I realized, I like wasn't sure if it was safe to cross, and it left me feeling a little like bummed out, like I had been left behind. Or like other times when like I was following them into a building and like I couldn't see where the door was. And something I picked up when I went to the Colorado Center for the Blind, one of the teachers there was like, when you're opening a door for a blind person, it helps to say like door on the left. And so I just said that to Lily, like for the first time. I was like, it's helpful if you say that. She did it like 2 or 3 times, then forgot and stopped doing it. And I was like, when we cross the street, like it would be helpful if you guys would just say like crossing, so that I can like know, and that they got better at. And Oscar was like, he's great, because he like, it's like a project for him. It's like, okay, cool, like this is something I can do, and like he gets very enthusiastic about it. So he was like crossing, and it was like this evolving process. And by the end of the trip, they were both doing it. And so that's all to say that like the adjustments that I have to make, like they wouldn't know to do that. I can't expect them to like figure out to say door on the left without me learning about that practice. And so it's this kind of like it's not a push and pull, but it's more like a, like if you imagine, like, I don't know, somebody holding you'll appreciate this metaphor because I know that you've done running with a tether. It's a little bit like that, right? It's like there's like slack in the rope, and then there's no slack in the rope, and it's kind of like that, where like, but it only works if I do the work myself. And I think one of the big and painful breakthroughs that I had to go through, that I document in the book, that Lily was very generous in letting me document, was that original moment where I think I just expected her, like through some magic of empathy, to like figure all that out on her own, and be like, oh, of course, like using a cane would be difficult, and now I understand that you need to use it, without my saying a word to her about it. And I felt really resentful, like, why are you so freaked out about this cane? Like, don't you just instantly get it? And it took years for me to figure out, okay, I have to wrap my head around this, and then that will give me the ability to communicate it to them.
Yeah, thank you for that. That is, I feel, again, that's so similar in the sense that, I feel like over the years, as my kids were growing up, I felt a lot of challenges around not being able to participate in driving them to sports events and all the different things that they do growing up, and having to try to be equal, and just and also being very open and about what we can and cannot do, and what is to be expected, and how to work together to be like really that partner and father and whatnot. And it's really, but I think the thing that's just kind of amazing about the whole thing is that at the end of the day, it just feels like it's such a close family relationship, and that my kids have a sense of what I can do and what I can't, and are so wanting to help. So it's just that feeling of, just being there for you is kind of amazing, and they just know what to do, when to do it, and just it's really neat.
Yeah, I mean, that makes me think about, like, I think one of the big things that I learned in researching and writing this book came from like the blind community, which is this idea, like, I think you hear it in the phrase alternative techniques. I think like the word accommodations has this association, for me anyway, growing up, of like, oh, you have a special need. Like, it's in the phrase special needs. Like, oh, you have special needs, so we're going to make an accommodation for you. And it makes it just feel like blindness or disability is this very negative thing that requires a sort of like act of charity, and that's the last thing you want from your family, right? Like, oh, like, we're all having fun, but like, let's like add a little bit of charity for like disabled family member. But I think it's one thing that I've learned is that, like, if you reframe it and you think about like the word alternative, it's like a value neutral term, right? It's not a lesser than technique. It's not like we all do it the good way, but then you have to do it the crappy way. It's just like, no, like, blindness requires this other route. And I really feel that, like, that can sound sort of Pollyanna-ish or whatever, but I in practice I've experienced it, and I experienced it with my family, where it's like, sure, let me think of a specific example, like, I mean, just what I was just saying about like walking around this dark and foreign city with my family. Like, yeah, they have to say crossing or door on your left. That's not like a burden. That's just like an alternative technique. Like, some people just cross the road without saying anything, but our family, we say something. Like, who cares? Alternative.
Exactly. Fantastic. So I think we'd be remiss if we, this is SiteTech Global Technology Conference, and we might want to just have a quick word on technology here. So given everything that you've learned, the skills that you've developed, the people that you've spoken with, and your experience to date, can you think of a particular current barriers, technology barriers, access barriers, things that just aren't quite as good as you'd like them? Like, if there's one thing that you could change, that you feel would make the most meaningful difference right now for you, what would that be?
For me, oh wow, that's a tough one.
And keep in mind that the audience here is going to be people that are in the business of innovation and the cutting edge of technology. And
yeah.
so,
I mean, okay, yeah, all right. Well, we've got a bunch of like engineers with unfettered access to resources and ingenuity, where's my flying car, my autonomous flying car? I mean, transportation, I think just where I live is a big one. You talk about the family thing of like wanting to, take your family out to the sporting event or whatever. I think autonomous vehicles would be a game changer for me. I mean, one thing that I'll say on that front that I feel like in my infancy as a blind person is this really interesting conundrum of trying to figure out what is actually an access barrier and what is just me like still wrapping my head around how assistive technology works. And I'm like, even in the last like 3 months, I feel like I've leveled up enough to like the point where I can sort of figure out if something is accessible or not versus like me just not knowing how to use JAWS or VoiceOver. But that is, I think, an underappreciated aspect of accessibility. I think it's and I know blind people who are like just sort of entering this world or like just maybe not even legally blind yet, but they're like, they like the political flavor of being like, this website is inaccessible, that's unacceptable, I hereby cancel you. And I think it's important to have that kind of advocacy and activism. But at the same time, like there's so many cases when I look at these, whatever it is, like website, piece of software, and I'm like, is it inaccessible or like, is it just broken on like the level of how it works? I mean, I'm kind of interested in your perspective on that question because, because just of the, by virtue of what you do all day. But like accessibility is a much more slippery concept than I originally gave it credit for, I think.
Well, I love the answer because there is so much to be said about an individual's skill set, right?
Mm-hmm.
How well you know the tools that you're provided, and then also those tools evolve as well. So we're just in a continuously evolving landscape of the eyesight decline, but then all of the technologies that are coming to bear over time that are helping improve things, but that also brings change, and change means you have to adapt. And so this like adaptation is the key. But I think my intuition on the technology is that we're going to continue to see just kind of more easily, I'll use the word accessible, means of communicating with each other through the use of technology. But I think what we'll end up seeing is much more personalized relationship with computing. And so instead of having just a general computer that is designed for everybody, our experiences will be generated in real time, and the generation of that experience will be based on your abilities. And so you can see a little bit, what you're presented with will be what you can see and not something that you can't. If you can't see it all, your experience will be conversational, period. And it's not reading the screen, it's going to be conversing with you and answering, engaging. So I think we're seeing a lot of that today, and I'm excited to see where it goes. But certainly there's like, I guess my point on that would be that we're not, what we know today will certainly be different tomorrow. Like the one thing I can say is things are going to change, and they're going to change dramatically.
I know Josh Mealy is a part of this conference, and there's something that he said that I think speaks to that, and just to my original sense of like the slipperiness of the idea, where I think originally I had the sense of accessibility as a binary, where it's like, the checkout button is not labeled, so you like physically can't check out with a screen reader. But he made this point that like if you have to tab 23 times to get to the checkout button, that's also a form of inaccessibility. And that idea, and Chancey Fleet, who's another sort of like mentor of mine in a way of just like, or I think just like a thought leader, and I've learned so much from her perspective on technology. She talks about how it's like a second class citizen experience of being a technology user. And so I think there's real hope in what you just said, that like the platform could be conformed to the user rather than this sort of universal design model where it's like hopefully everybody gets to come along. Maybe that kind of second class experience of tabbing 47 times, even if it's technically accessible, will go by the wayside.
That is the hope.
Yeah.
Well, I really do want to thank you so much for being vulnerable, writing the book. You're a fantastic communicator. The book is wonderful. I think it adds so much to the conversation on blindness and vision loss. And thank you for joining us today as well. Really, really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much, Daryl. I really appreciate your saying that. And thanks for having me.